Okay, so Kazuha is finally rerunning again. And I think across YouTube, there's so many guides on him that there isn't really that much for me to add. However, there is some techniques that I think even now aren't really covered much. If you're just pulling him today or this week, or even if you hardcore players who've had him for a while, maybe you might learn something. See, you might think that Kazuha has two different elemental skills. There is his tap skill that you can plunge out of, and it has a small suction. And then there's his hold skill that you can also plunge out of, and this hold skill has a much bigger suction. So usually, ideally in game, his hold skill is the one that you want to use more often, because it's very consistent at tightly grouping enemies for you to attack. But it has a big downside, which is that its cooldown is much higher than the tap skill. So if you defeat those enemies quickly, and new enemies spawn in that you also need to group, well, you can't use his grouping as it still can be on cooldown. Then I have to end up just waiting and wasting time. Okay, but what if I told you that he actually has a third skill? I can call it the semi-hold. You basically hold E for a bit but let go of it quickly. And what happens here is you get a suction sort of in between the tap and the hold. Or rather, you can say you get a bit of that initial suction from the hold. And then the benefit here is, if you notice, the skill cooldown is only 6 seconds. You can see me show the difference in suction with his items. And it can also work this way with Klee's bombs. So when is this used in the Abyss? Well, you can see it for yourself, right? In many Abysses in the past, we needed strong grouping, but we also needed to do it more frequently than Kazuha's hold could do. And if you don't have Kazuha's C1, or if you're not using Sacrificial Sword, that could be difficult. So people figured out strats where you just use the semi-hold skill, which managed to group one set of enemies. And then when the next set of enemies spawn, you're still able to group them quickly again, without having to wait. Unfortunately, I did try to look back at some of my past speedruns to find videos where this strat was popular, for example in 3.4, but conveniently it seems I didn't record and upload those runs. I guess I was playing Nilu a bit too much then, who obviously doesn't use Kazuha. Luckily, these other YouTubers I know, they shared their runs, which I have linked in the description. And as a bonus, you could kind of say there is also a fourth skill, which is when you tap skill, but then you double tap spacebar or whatever your jump button is to cancel the plunge and not do it. This version of the skill is very niche, but there's a few main reasons why you might use this. The first reason is if you're using Freedom Sworn. You see, Freedom Sworn's buffs activate after 2 swells, right? So if you're setting up with your team and your setup is long, sometimes what I would do is not plunge so that I can activate the buffs later and closer to my main DPS's damage window. Since the Freedom Swarm buffs only last 12 seconds, if I do activate it too early by plunging, effectively I can end up wasting about half of that buff time whilst I'm still setting up. I will add though that sometimes when doing this you can mess up the spacebar and you can end up just floating around. You can sometimes end up retrying if you try to do this and fail. Another reason why you might want to cancel the plunge is if you're playing a freeze team with Mona, since her freeze duration doesn't really last a long time, it's pretty scuffed. So sometimes when Kazuha jumps then plunges, he will shatter the grouping and Mona can't freeze them back well enough. This can actually be relevant now. You can see in this current Abyss I could do that, but actually for this particular strat, because these Whopper flowers were spaced so far away, I needed to use hold skill for the grouping. And obviously when you use hold skill, you can't actually double tap space to cancel the jump. So here I just float in the air waiting for the enemies to lose HP instead. Whenever I tried plunging here instead, I wouldn't be able to defeat them quick enough because they would just ungroup. So hopefully you found this video helpful. Congratulations if you're just getting Kazuha now, he's an amazing character. Very high usage, he's used in a bunch of teams. He's used a lot in the overworld, he's used a lot in all these events we're playing, and he's also very fun to play. Also, let me know if you're interested in me making more pro tip Kazuha videos. For example, I know a lot of people hype up Favonia's sword, but I could give my insight on, you could say, the true reasons to use each of his weapons. Like, if you notice in some of my speed runs, it ranges wildly. Sometimes I use Freedom Sworn, sometimes I use Sack's Sword, sometimes Xiphos, and sometimes Favonius. And actually they were all used for the optimal speed run for that specific abyss, at least for my own account. So I would say he doesn't actually have always one best weapon. So yeah, let me know if you're interested in more of that. Thanks for watching.